From PBS News Student Reporting Labs,
and WETA
this is On Our Minds, Election 2024,
with Nico,
and Poojasai.
a podcast by teens for teens, covering what really matters to us.
Hey, Nico.
Hi, Poojasai. How has your week been?
It's been good. I went to my first concert yesterday.
Oh my gosh, who was it?
It was Metro. You know.
That's like one thing I would have never expected from you. I'm gonna be honest.
It was a okay concert. It was actually not that bad. What did you do this week?
A lot of exams. I didn't realize junior year would be so many exams, but everything went really well. I've made a lot of time for my friends. I've been going to lots of cafes.
Ironically enough, coffee shops connect with their episodes theme really well, which is like America's youngest politicians. I actually got to interview Averie Bishop, who's running for state rep here in Texas, but I got to meet her at a coffee shop.
That's so cool. And like you said, this week's episode is all about America's youngest politicians. We got a chance to speak to candidates on both sides of the aisle to learn more about where they stand on issues that matter most to young people.
But first, we wanted to share a conversation we had with Rachel Johnfaza, who's a journalist covering Gen Z in politics.
She helped us get a big picture view of the youngest candidates running this election.
Rachel, obviously Gen Z is going to be a very influential part in this election cycle. So is there anything that young conservative and liberal candidates agree on when it comes to Gen Z related issues? What are some of their differences and what are some ways these parties can meet in the middle on these issues?
I actually would venture to say that younger candidates do a better job of meeting in that middle ground. When I talk with young candidates, and I ask them what are the issues that are top of mind, the number one issue that they bring up is the life affordability and the cost of rent or housing. Younger leaders feel that they are maybe more equipped to deal with this because they are understanding the day-to-day experience of what it's like to have to try to find an apartment or a home to rent because they can't really conceptualize the idea of buying a house at this point. Both young Republicans and young Democrats are also concerned with issues around mental health. I believe that there are groups on both the left and the right that are working on solutions around the climate crisis. These are issues that candidates across the aisle agree in our generation are major problems.
I think that the descriptor, young candidate is so interesting because young means so many different things when it comes to politics. People have even talked about Kamala Harris being a young candidate. And as a I guess younger presidential candidate, how do you think that she changes this election?
Despite the fact that she's not, she's not a member of Gen Z, she's not a millennial. I have heard from many young people that they are very excited by the fact that she could be the first woman, the first Black woman, the first South Asian American woman to hold the presidency. And the representation that she would embody is very important to young people.
So the majority of young voters skew liberal, even according to Pew Research, about 2/3 of voters ages 18 to 24 associate with the Democratic Party compared to 1/3 who align with the GOP. So tell us more about young conservatives.
There's a ton of excitement right now from young conservatives. I've heard from a number of young conservatives, including a young man from the University of Chicago who I spoke to when I was at the RNC, that it has become far more acceptable from his perspective to be outspoken as supportive of former President Trump. I would also say a part of this, and I've written a bit about this too, is this conservative culture online and the way that it's resonating, especially with young men. So when you look at the breakdown of the youth electorate, young women are more likely to skew left and young men are more likely to skew right. And that gap has been growing.
So is there anything else we should know about Gen Z candidates or this election?
There's a lot of frustration from young people. That is sort of the number one word I often hear when I ask people how they feel about politics is frustrated or fed up. And yet at the same time, we do see a number of young people running for office and saying, if I'm frustrated by the system, I'm actually going to throw my hat in the ring and do something about it myself. Oftentimes, young people are running because they see an issue in their exact community that they feel uniquely positioned to solve. And that's where it starts.
Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you so much, Poojasai and Nico, for having me. I really appreciate it.
I love that convo with Rachel, Nico. I will say that I'm very hopeful for the future because as she is saying that more younger people are in politics now, they're just trying to bring people together, trying to actually solve the problems, which I think is really, really inspiring and something, our nation can really look forward to.
Yeah, I totally agree. For example, I'm a youth commissioner for my county, the county of Santa Clara. And one thing we did last year is a $1.1 billion children's budget was passed. And now that means there's $1 billion going towards things that young people really need. For example, wellness centers at their school where they can get like resources they need, healthcare, mental health care. I think it's so important. And I'm glad that, in California and across the country, people are really starting to step up and, represent themselves.
I love how young people are stepping up and try to do the right thing. Up next is my conversation with Averie Bishop. Now, full transparency, I did volunteer with her campaign for a few months last winter, but this was way before I started hosting this podcast. She's 28 years old, a former Miss Texas, and now she's running for Texas House of Representatives, so I'm super excited to sit down and learn more about her. Tell me how you decided to run for Texas House of Representatives.
I always knew I wanted to run for office one day. When I was 18, I saw my dad run for office. I was like so embarrassed as a teenager seeing my dad, who talks like this, doesn't have a typical education degree, and was wearing overalls, walking around the streets of McKinney running for office for mayor of McKinney. While he didn't win, he taught me a really important lesson, which is lawmakers in our government need to reflect real people who experience real struggles. That's how I made the decision to run. At the end of my year as Miss Texas, a fellow Filipino sister of mine called me up and recruited me to run for office now. I made the decision to run now versus later, but it did take a woman and a woman of color to ask me to run.
So tell me how you felt the moment you were asked to run.
Ooh, can I do it? Am I old enough? Do I know what I'm doing? Do I have the actual solutions to the issues that lawmakers are trying to solve? Am I experienced enough? Am I educated enough? Am I rich enough to run? And I remember going onto social media and looking at all the content that was being produced by both left and right sides of media and seeing how much propaganda is being spewed by both parties, by so many different organizations. And I thought to myself, I really need to run for office now and try to be an individual who's running for office that remains accessible, transparent, and honest, because that's what we need in this day and age.
Why is visibility important in politics?
The saying goes, if you can't see it, you can't be it. It's really scary to be one of the first, but someone has to do it. At the very least, if I fail, if I make a mistake, if I don't win, I'm at least opening the door for women who can come behind me and won't have to experience the same challenges and insecurities that I did, because at least I came before them.
So do you think social media helps with the visibility aspect?
Yes, social media increases visibility, but we also have to increase transparency and honesty. Those are the things that are lacking on social media. And I'm trying to be as visible as possible in the most authentic way that I can be by showing day in the life videos of what it's like to run for office, being honest about my finances, the fact that I have to afford medical insurance, the fact that I was housing insecure last fall, the fact that I have a lot of student debt that I have to pay off. These things are what will increase not only visibility, but honesty and transparency across social media.
So if you do win this election, what do you hope to achieve as a state representative?
I'm a Democrat, young, running in Texas. When I'm elected, I'd be playing a lot of defense. I'll be defending a lot of the really important rights that we desperately want in Texas. For example, I'll defend public school education by voting against school vouchers. I'll defend any other legislation that's going to try to restrict women's bodies and make us second-class citizens if we aren't already in Texas. It's a lot of defense, but I'm looking forward to also proposing bills on the House floor. The three important issues that I'll be fighting for are public school education, reproductive health care, and fighting for working families, since both my parents were from the working class.
Thank you so much for your time.
I appreciate it, and hopefully you can protect your peace from the political strife that's happening.
Wow, Poojasai, I'm so proud of you. That was such a great conversation.
When I was interviewing Avery, and you probably guys heard it from the interview too, she talked about this concept of like visibility and transparency. And I didn't really understand how important that is to me until me and her were block walking one day. And she asked me a question like, are you ever gonna like run for office? And I'm like, girl, no, like that's not happening. And then she's like, why not? She kept asking me over and over again. And I just kind of said, because I don't really see anyone in office like me. I think she was kind of taken aback from that. And she's like, okay, and make the opportunity for yourself. And I think that was very inspiring for me because now I know that even if I don't really see anyone like me in another space, I know that I should just make this path for myself.
And that really resonates with me because, for example, I'm the first in my family to be able to really focus on academics and not have to work or worry about things, just studying all the time. I got to make a path for myself. I have so many people's work for centuries leading up to my life. And now, hearing from another young person in politics on the other side of the aisle, Olivia Brandeis from Danville, California, interviewed 21-year-old Wyatt Gable, who's running for North Carolina state legislature. Here's Olivia.
At just 21 years old, Republican Wyatt Gable is running to become North Carolina House Representative for District 14, which includes Jacksonville and part of the Eastern Shore. This March, he beat the 84-year-old incumbent George Cleveland for the Republican nomination. Gable will now go on to face Democrat Carmen Spicer in November for a seat in the state's House of Representatives. I talked to him about his journey from student to politician. So Wyatt, what inspired you to become involved in politics at such a young age?
I kind of got into it early. I'd say in high school. I was kind of involved slightly, not really much. I just kind of saw a lot going on with COVID, and then we had a hurricane come through here, and it destroyed my high school. So we were out of school for 2 months. So I kind of saw how ineffective and non-efficient the wheels of government were. So kind of got involved in the 2020 election. I put out yard signs for my county GOP, and I thought, I was like the coolest thing ever because I was 18 putting out yard signs. And then I got to college and I realized there was a lot more to it. And then I joined our Turning Point chapter and then became the president.
Turning Point, by the way, is a nonprofit that advocates for conservative politics on high school, college, and university campuses.
And then I just kind of remember feeling how I felt with all the COVID stuff going on, and especially at college, and I just want to help make a difference in people's lives, so I figured this is the best way I can do it, and here we are now.
Once you settled into college, what ultimately pushed you to begin your campaign?
Just realizing how big of a world there is in politics when I got to college, and realizing it wasn't just the county level. There's so many organizations and different factors that go into it, and I was able to be a part of that and really grow from there and understand everything better and make a lot of connections.
So Wyatt, why do you think it's so important for young people like you to run for office?
If you can give people that diversity in age, that's what they want. At least you've got me and a couple other people that are on the younger side, so you get a full range of representation in the legislature.
So what do you hope your campaign can change for the future of politics?
I'm just hoping that me being able to do this will encourage people that are our age to get involved. If I can get people to be engaged and actually get out and vote or potentially even run for office themselves, and I feel like I've been able to accomplish something that's, bigger than just myself.
This upcoming election cycle, if you do end up being elected to the North Carolina House of Representatives, how do you plan to continually include youth in your politics and policies?
From a policy standpoint, I think young people nowadays, we really care about, obviously, the economy like everybody, but especially in today's world where we're trying to figure, well, how am I going to be able to afford a house with how much housing costs, and am I going to be able to afford rent? So it's things along that line. And the other thing is education. I feel a lot of people are, what am I learning? Is it actually pertinent to life? And am I going to use it later in life? Or is it just going to be something that's taught and then I'm never going to use it again? So those are kind of things I'd like to focus on.
So I have one final question, Wyatt. What advice do you have for other young people who might want to run for office one day?
Be yourself, be honest, be sincere about why you're running. Don't be afraid to do it. I know it can be a little hard at the start trying to figure everything out, and it feels like you're overwhelmed, but that's just part of the process that you're going to have to go through. But don't give up. And if someone's not doing a job that you like, challenge them respectfully. Don't be afraid to ask questions. People don't ask enough questions. They just assume things. So don't be afraid and go for it, and you got it.
There are so many local issues that are affecting communities, but that just don't get much national attention. Up next, special correspondent Aidan Booker is joining us now to talk about his interview with one of the country's youngest mayors, Jaylen Smith. Hey, Aidan.
Hi, Poojasai. Hi, Nico. I'm so happy to be here with you guys.
Tell us a bit more about Mayor Smith.
He's the mayor of Earl, which is a very small, very community-oriented town of less than 2,000 in eastern Arkansas. And when he was elected in 2022 at 18, he became one of the youngest African-American mayors in U.S. history.
Getting elected at 18 is crazy. The guy was probably fresh out of high school.
Yeah, he actually was. So only months later, he was elected mayor, but clearly he was planning out his term during high school.
What is something Mayor Smith has accomplished during his time in the office?
Yeah, one thing he mentioned that was at the forefront of his campaign was bringing a grocery store to Earl. And while that might not seem like a large accomplishment to an outsider, the citizens of Earl were traveling miles to other cities just to find groceries. And like I said, this was a campaign promise that he ended up delivering on. So that really speaks to his motivation to become the mayor. Take a listen to what he has to say about this in his own words.
I would say my most significant accomplishment is bringing in a grocery store to the community. A lot of people didn't have transportation to get 30 minutes to get groceries, but now it's less than 5 minutes up the road that you can just call your cousin and your nephew to get you up there. And so that we're very grateful that people are really taking advantage of this opportunity.
I could really never imagine not having a grocery store that's like 3 to 5 minutes away. Like I literally have a Kroger that's 3 minutes away. So definitely what Mayor Smith did to his community would have a very significant impact on the people there.
How does his age affect his approach to governing?
I would truly say that his age is honestly one of his favorite things.
My youth is honestly that we're motivated. Well, I'm motivated to, number one, to improve my community. And so if we want a community of excellence and a community of the best quality of life, we have to go back and change our practices. We have to change our laws, and we have to revise our ordinances so that we can move our community forward. Because you cannot build a community if you have the same poor practices in place.
I think Mayor Smith gives our country a lot of hope, especially because we see these young people taking initiative and making that change in their community because they're tired of like their older legislators and elected people of power not really doing anything. So I think that's really inspiring.
Yeah, I really resonate with what he says at the end, where he says, like, you can't build a community if you have the same poor practices in place. I think politics and law in general is about change, and sometimes like we lose sight of that.
I will say the one major thing that stood out to me during our interview is how relatable he is. He didn't feel like a typical, stereotypical politician that you'd see on TV who doesn't have a genuine understanding of the community.
Thank you so much, Aidan, for coming on today. We really appreciate it.
Thank you guys for having me.
Before we go, the big thing that every single one of our elected officials or candidates mentioned is the importance of community in their campaigns or governance. Which reminds me of something that U.S. Representative Maxwell Frost from Florida told SRL in a recent interview.
The power I have right now as an elected official is borrowed power. My community is letting me borrow this power for this amount of time, whatever it is. But the power of like the people in our communities, it's forever. And that's something that people should always remember.
Maxwell Frost is 27 years old and the youngest member of Congress. He was also the first member of Gen Z elected to Congress.
If you're able to vote this coming election, keep in mind that who you're voting for works for your community.
That's all we have for today. Make sure to tune in next time for an episode about one of the most debated aspects about our election system, the Electoral College.
On Our Minds, Election 2024 is produced by Student Reporting Labs.
Today's segments were produced by moi, Poojasai Kona from Frisco, Texas,
Olivia Brandeis from Danville, California,
and Aidan Booker from Twinsburg, Ohio.
Research and fact-checking by Yasmine Sakr and Becky Wandel.
Music from Blue Dot Sessions.
This episode was produced by lead podcast producer Briget Ganske with help from Associate Producer Wyatt Mayes.
Wyatt Mayes also edited and mixed this episode.
Approval and oversight by Editorial Director Marie Cusick.
And Executive Producer Leah Clapman.